Hola, muy buenas tardes, tengan todos ustedes. Te saluda Judith Barriga de CLT en español, que como cada otra semana o every other week estamos con las oficinas del abogado Johnson and Nicholson, que usualmente hablamos temas acerca de migración, pero hoy vamos a hablar de otro tema y quiero decirles a ustedes que la conversación se va a manejar un poquito más en inglés que en español, pero pueden mandar sus preguntas. Estoy con el día de hoy con Miss Nicholson, que es la abogada de leyes familiares del bufete de abogados de Johnson & Nicholson. Y vamos a hablar qué es lo que se trata leyes familiares. Quizás no traducir esto completamente, así que les voy a invitar que se mantengan atentos porque va a salir el video con los subtítulos más tarde. So, Ms. Nicholson, I just give a quick introduction of what is it we're going to talk about today. Family law. That's another of the type of cases that you guys take. So what would I start from there? What does family law means?
Family law in North Carolina encompasses basically three different categories of cases: divorces, child custody, and child support. And so what I'd like to do this afternoon is kind of go into each of those three different areas kind of with a little bit more detail so that our audience knows exactly what is involved in those types of cases.
Vamos a hablar rapidísimo y no voy a traducir palabra por palabra, por eso les quiero invitar a que ustedes se metan más tarde y vean este video con subtítulos, pero vamos a hablar acerca de lo que son las leyes familiares, todo lo que tiene que ver con la pensión de los niños, con la patria potestad de los niños, divorcios y ese tipo de cosas. So, who is entitled family law? Who applies to these laws?
In North Carolina, any person, as long as you meet certain residency requirements in the state of North Carolina, you can file for any of these actions: divorce, child custody, or child support. And by residency, that means that you've lived in the state of North Carolina for at least 6 months.
6 months. Does our partner, ex-partner, ex-wife or husband has to live in the same state as me? Or it's my residency or the child residency?
If it's involving divorce, it's going to be relevant to the adults, the parents, the husband and wife. If it's involving the children in child custody or child support, then it's going to mean the child has to have lived in North Carolina for at least 6 months.
Ok. El día de hoy estamos platicando, para los que se van conectando, estamos platicando con Miss Elaine o Miss Nicholson, que ella es la encargada de los casos de leyes familiares en las oficinas de Johnson & Nicholson, que quiero compartirles. Ellos tienen oficinas en Charlotte, en Charleston y Morganton. Yes, lo dije bien, Morganton. Esos son los números de teléfono: 704-457-5094. 704-457-5094 es el número de teléfono. Estábamos platicando con la abogada que vamos a estar pasando entre... va a ser más en inglés, pero un poquito en español para que ustedes tengan una idea lo que estamos platicando, y si quieren mandar sus preguntas lo hagan. Pero estamos hablando de cómo no importa si tienes un estatus legal o no, tienes derecho a aplicar las leyes de custodia, de divorcio o de patria potestad, no, manutención de los niños en el estado de Carolina del Norte, siempre y cuando el niño o tú tengan por lo menos 6 meses viviendo aquí, y vamos a hacer la traducción más detallada más adelante para que ustedes lo escuchen. What do I need? What would I start with divorce? Because that's a very common thing. The other day we were having a discussion because it becomes like a controversy, topic on the table. I got married in Mexico. Can I divorce, in the United States? Or the contrary, I got married in the United States. Can I divorce in Mexico? So...
Well, I can only speak to the laws of North Carolina. So to answer your question, as far as even if you got married in a different state or in a different country, as long as you meet the residency requirement. And just to be clear, only one of the parties has to live in North Carolina. So for example, I have a client right now who's filing for divorce. She lives in another state, in the United States, but the husband is here in North Carolina. And so we're going to go ahead and file the divorce here in North Carolina. So as long as one of the parties, the husband or wife, lives in North Carolina for at least 6 months at the time the divorce is filed, the action can be filed in the state of North Carolina. It doesn't matter where the parties were married.
How long does it take to get divorced?
Usually, if there are no hiccups in the case, meaning we're able to find the other person, we know where they live, we're able to serve them with the documents, it usually takes about 8 weeks for the entire process to run its course.
8 weeks. But what about that? Because I have heard that in North Carolina, I need to be separated for a year to be able to file for a divorce. What's the difference on this 8 weeks and then the year?
So the actual divorce action, once it's filed in court, it usually takes about 8 weeks now. But before you can file in court, the parties do have to be separated for 1 year, for at least 1 year. So that's what takes a lot of time, just waiting that 1 year period.
Yeah.
I know when you want to get divorced, 1 year can seem like 10 years, right?
I know, right? More when you want to get divorced, like right away.
I know, and I get those calls a lot of times where people may say sometimes they get divorced and a month later they discover that they're really not compatible with their spouse and they want to go ahead and get divorced right away. And unfortunately, you have to wait 1 year. Doesn't matter, if you only live together 2 weeks, still have to wait.
You have to wait 1 year.
Yes.
Why is that? Is there any reason for that?
I mean, I've never done, and I tell you this, it varies from state to state, but I think the rationale in North Carolina is that they want to give couples time. Sometimes you need a cooling off period, right? Sometimes you just need to kind of live apart to discover that you really do love each other. And then it gives you time to do marital counseling. So it's really an opportunity for parties to have enough time to really consider, do they really want divorce, or are there things that they can do in the interim or during that 1 year period to maybe come back together.
Estamos hablando con la abogada Nicholson en estos instantes acerca de las leyes de divorcio, platicando cómo puede tomar solamente 8 semanas divorciarte si no hay ningún problema entre las dos personas involucradas, pero que hay que estar separados por 1 año. Así que si tú tienes alguna pregunta, mándala que la hacemos con la abogada y lo ponemos aquí en los comentarios, respuesta en inglés y en español, o si no, también puedes comunicarte directamente a sus oficinas que vamos a estarte compartiendo los números de teléfono. La abogada Nicholson habla en inglés, pero la oficina de Johnson & Nicholson tienen personal que habla en inglés y español que te pueden ayudar con tu trámite y con la traducción con la abogada. 704-457-5094. Algo súper importante que nos platicó la abogada ahorita es que no importa en dónde te hayas casado, en el estado de Carolina del Norte te puedes divorciar siempre y cuando tengas mínimo 6 meses viviendo ahí. Así que si tu marido o tu ex vive en otro país, pero tú tienes 6 meses en Carolina del Norte, puedes hacerlo. No importa, te casaste en México, en la China, en El Salvador o donde República Dominicana, te puedes divorciar en Carolina del Norte. Pero es importante que te comuniques con la abogada para que vea cuál es tu caso. 704-457-5094. 704-457-5094. Who decides when the year has, become? Because sometimes if one of the parties wants to get divorced and the other don't, then there's always a fight there. So what's really the process to, be able to demonstrate that we have been separate for a year?
Well, I always tell clients that in North Carolina, they really go by the honor system. So there's nothing, unless the date becomes contested, meaning unless, like you said, one of the parties is fighting and said, no, we didn't get divorced. I mean, it's separated February 15th. It was March 15th. Unless it becomes an issue like that and there's a disagreement as to the date, the court's going to take the plaintiff's word for it. And, if a client comes to me and says, I've been separated for a year, then that's what I go by.
Okay.
Like I said,
so there's no need to demonstrate, to bring letters or things like that.
No, unless it becomes contested. And every time you file a divorce action in North Carolina, you're going to sign a verification that the plaintiff attesting to what that person is saying is true. So you want to be truthful in what you file with the court because you're swearing under oath that you're telling the truth.
Let's go through the serve part. the other party needs to be served. What does that mean, and who served them?
Service means basically that you notify the other party, the defendant, that there's an action involving them that's been filed in court. And service is a preliminary part of what has to take place anytime you sue someone in court, whether it's a divorce or if you're suing them for money owed, you have to notify the other person. And so the law in North Carolina, as in most states, is very specific as to how that person has to be served. In this state, service is either by, you can send the sheriff's officer to hand deliver documents to the person or someone in their household. You can serve them by certified mail or FedEx by sending it, through some postal system where you're going to get proof that person's been served. Or the third way to serve a person is by publishing a notification in the mail. In the newspaper. And you can only do publication by newspaper if you're not able to serve them by sheriff or by mail. So does this
mean that if I have no idea where he is, that he just disappeared from the picture, and for whatever reason I want to get divorced, perhaps I want to get married again or whatever, I can file for divorce?
Absolutely. You would probably, in that case, if you don't know where the other person is and you've done a little bit of research, Googled them, maybe search voter records. There's a few things you kind of have to do to try to find that person. But if you can't, then you can serve by publication at the last known, the city and state where they last lived, as far as you know,
the information that you have.
Right. The best information that you can obtain.
Well, I'm going to share voy a compartir los números del abogado una vez más. Estábamos platicando acerca de cuál es el proceso de divorciarnos. Nos explicó la abogada acerca de cómo hay que esperar un año o estar separados por lo menos un año, que no importa en dónde viva tu pareja o si sepas algo de ella, puedes también divorciarte, pero llámalas a las oficinas 704-457-5094 es el número de teléfono. Para más información, en las oficinas de Johnson & Nicholson tienen personal que habla en español para que te traduzca tu caso con la abogada Nicholson. Vamos a cambiar el tema un poco y vamos a hablar acerca de manutención y patria potestad, que también es algo que en nuestra comunidad como que no nos queda claro, tanto la obligación de pagar la manutención o también la obligación de compartir la patria potestad de nuestros niños, ¿no? O el tiempo que comparten con nosotros. Ahí están los números de la oficina, 704-457-5094, 704-457-5094. So, Ms. Nicholson, I was just saying that we're going to switch the topic. I think divorce was kind of easy and clear, to understand. Perhaps the complicated part are the parties involved.
Let me just add one last thing about divorces. In some countries, if you were married in a different country and you get divorced in the United States, some countries would require you to file that divorce decree in the country where you were married. So, for example, and I don't know how it varies from country to country, but I've heard kind of through the grapevine that in some instances, a person who got a divorce here in North Carolina but was married in a different country would need to file that document in that other country to kind of put that country on notice that the divorce has taken place. So,
what about, and I'm sorry to interrupt, now that you mentioned that, what about that when I get married in the United States and then I go and get divorced in Mexico or Dominican Republic, which was the original country where I got married? Is that valid in the United States?
Yes, it would be. And I've never heard the United States needing to have foreign judgments registered, divorces specifically. I won't say all foreign judgments, but a divorce is going to be legally recognized here in the United States without you having to take additional action like registering it or anything like that.
Oh, okay. The reason why I'm asking you, because the other day we were having this conversation and it had to do with someone wanted to change the name in the Social Security office. And when she brought her divorce papers from another country, they told her that they were valid. So I'm not an expert, but I told her, you need to talk to a lawyer, but perhaps the person that was helping you at the Social Security office was not familiar with the process. But I'm sure you are divorced.
Right. And sometimes, unfortunately, what we find sometimes is when you deal with some of these government agents, and they may not know the answers. And so it's easier for them to just deny something, right? Rather than take a few minutes and try to learn or figure out the right answer. It's just deny, deny, deny. So I would certainly recommend that person see an attorney to maybe look into that a little bit further for them.
704-457-5094, la abogada, y como les dije, vamos a hacer una traducción más detallada más adelante, pero la abogada nos acaba de explicar cómo no importa en dónde te cases o en dónde te divorcies, cualquiera de los dos trámites es válido en los Estados Unidos. Es uno de los países que no te pide que registres o que pruebes exactamente que te has divorciado o que te has casado en otro país. So, hablando de manutención, vamos a hablar cuáles son nuestros derechos. So, let's talk about child support and custody, which is another thing that I want to say as Latino community, we don't know how to fight it well. You know, if he gives us a little bit, it's fine, whatever he can. If he wants to see the kids, it's fine. If she won't let me see the kids, it's okay. So, let's talk about that.
Well, you know, one thing that, you know, people need to remember is that as long as you're in the United States, you're governed by the laws of the United States. And so even if you're a citizen, if you're not a citizen of this country, you're a citizen of Mexico or some other country, but you're here, you have the right to seek child support or child custody from the other person. You should not let your legal status deter you, in other words, from believing that you have the right to fight for those things in the court system here in this country. And so you're right. I get that a lot where, you know, I'll have a parent come to me and say, well, the other parent won't let me see the child. And the other parent is completely controlling the process. And it just raises alarms with me, particularly when you have a parent who wants to be involved, but where the other parent is controlling the process. So in a situation like that, I always recommend that the parent who wants to see the child file an action in court, because at the very least, it's going to get the attention of the parent who's withholding access, right? And it'll let that parent know you're serious. Sometimes all it takes is filing in court and the other parent gets kind of concerned. Okay, let's have a conversation. Let's work this out. But sometimes you do end up having to go to court and getting a judge involved, you know, to be able to exert your rights.
I'm going to ask the most common question when the custody comes, you know, into a conversation. Child support, you know, because some of them are like, I'm already giving her money and she's not letting me see the kids, you know, or if I'm not giving her really much, you know, or he's not giving me any at all. Why would he or she, you know, had the right to see their kids? I have two questions for that. Is like, how true is that I have to give child support to be able to see my kid? And the other one, how do I calculate how much money I have to give? Because I know that's the most common question. Everybody wants to know if you have $250 a month, it's enough.
Right. And we know, you know, you probably can't put a easy price on what it costs to raise children. So I'll answer kind of the child support and child custody are two different actions. Obviously, they're involving the same child, the same set of parents, but they're separate issues. So even though a parent may be paying child support, for example, if they haven't taken the step of asking for child custody or visitation, then they may not get any. So just because you know, an action for child support is filed in court, for example, if no person's requested child custody or visitation, they may not get any. So you've got to specifically ask for what you want, not assume that because you're paying child support, you're automatically going to get to see your child. Okay.
Okay.
So that needs to be made clear. But then the reverse of that is always also true. Because you're not paying child support doesn't mean you're going to be denied the right to see your child. If you ask for child custody or visitation, if you've specifically asked for that, and you go to court or negotiate an agreement for that, that's what you're going to get. And if child support hasn't been requested, then it's not going to be decided under the action. So, you know, people need to be very clear. They're two different actions. They can come together if they're asked for under the same document, but they could easily be decided as two very separate issues. They're always going to be interrelated in that a child support amount is going to be based on the amount of time that the parent is spending with the child. So that there is a relationship But if they're not asked for together, then they're going to be decided as two separate issues, if that makes sense.
Estamos platicando con la abogada Nicholson, hablando acerca de lo que es la patria potestad y manutención de nuestros hijos. Súper interesante lo que ella nos comentó, es que primero tú no tienes que tener un estatus legal aquí para demandar child support, o tu pareja no tiene que tener un estatus legal para demandar que te den ayuda o manutención para tu hijo, o para reclamar o exigir ver a tu hijo. Lo que sí dijo, y más adelante lo vamos a traducir con detalle, es que una y la otra cosa, aunque están relacionadas, no están casadas, ¿eh? O sea que si tú no estás dando, pero quieres ver a tu hijo, puedes demandar eso, o al revés, si quieres ver, si no te están dando lo suficiente, pero tampoco demandan ver a su hijo, también puedes hacer eso. Así que llama a las oficinas del abogado 704-457-5094, 704-457-5094. Para Daryl, que puso no habla español, comprende y comprende español, this is a Spanglish interview today, Daryl. So, yeah, hang out with us. 704-457. ¿Hay diferencia en los costos de divorcio cuando las personas están en común acuerdo que cuando no? Is there a difference on a price of a divorce when there is a fight or when they are on an agreement to divorce?
Well, the divorce, we kind of just talked about divorce from the sense of two people just wanting to no longer be a married couple. There are other actions that can be involved in divorces. So, or other issues, if there is marital property, right? If there are things that the couple acquired while they were married, those things need to be separated, right? And distributed. So that can make a divorce case a little bit more complicated. In addition, if a spouse is seeking spousal support or alimony, that can make things more complicated. So yes, those kinds of cases are going to cost more than a straight divorce where the couple's like, oh, we just want to live, be apart. We don't have any property. We don't have any children. There's nothing to fight about. We just want to, be divorced so we can move on. So yes, a contested divorce or a divorce that involves division of marital property or spousal support will cost more because those are more complicated cases.
La pregunta dice diferencia de los costos de divorcio cuando las personas están en común acuerdo o no. Lo que contesta la abogada es que, bueno, hace rato estuvimos platicando de un divorcio fácil y común, cuando las dos personas quieren divorciarse o alguien está desaparecida. Sin embargo, si dentro del matrimonio se adquirieron propiedades, una casa, o hay otro tipo de valores que se necesitan distribuir entre las dos personas, la pareja, alguna parte de la pareja party o persona está pidiendo alimony, entonces ahí es donde las cosas se pueden poner un poco complicadas y puede ser un poco más caro que un divorcio en donde los dos están de acuerdo y dicen no tenemos hijos, no tenemos propiedades, nos queremos separar. Es súper importante que cualquiera que sea tu caso te comuniques con la abogada. 704-457-5094 es el número de teléfono y espero que quede contestada la pregunta. Así que sí es más caro. Si no están de acuerdo, si hay que hacer distribución, si hay que hacer un acuerdo de separación o a decir, ya llevamos años separados, firmamos y nos vamos. So the other part, child support. How do we calculate child support? How much is really the right amount?
Well, in North Carolina, as in most states in this country, they use what are called guidelines. And so each state kind of puts this formula together that looks at the cost of living, what rent costs or mortgage and gas and food and different, monthly expenses that you need to maintain a household. And they put together these calculators. So when it's time to file for child support, there's just about 5 or 6 pieces of information that the parent has to provide. The number of children that are involved in the case, how much income each parent earns on a monthly basis, whether there are healthcare costs involved, whether there are childcare costs involved, and you put all that information into the calculator, and then the amount of time that the child or children spend with each parent, you put all those numbers in, and it gives you an amount because the formula is already built into the calculator. So it's really straightforward. And the calculators, they're called the North Carolina Child Support Calculator.
Okay.
They're out there via Google. So a parent who maybe it's being taken to court to pay child support, if you can find the calculator online and plug these numbers in, you can have a good sense of what you'd be required to pay by the court system. It's not a guessing game. It's not a mystery. It's public. You know what I mean? The calculator is public information, and it gives you a good ballpark in terms of what a parent should be paying for child support.
Estamos platicando de cuánto nos tocaría pagar la manutención de un niño, pero ahora la pregunta, la oficina del abogado Johnson & Nicholson nos puede ayudar si tenemos un caso de manutención que no nos ha pagado. So the question is, can Johnson & Nicholson help us to fight if I haven't ever received child support? You know, my kid is 7 years old and he has given me $1,000 in the last, 7 years. Yes, and how does that actually work?
Well, what I tell you this, one thing that I run up against here in North Carolina when people want to do consultations with me about child support, sometimes the other parent is undocumented and doesn't have a social security number, or they're working under the table, right? They're receiving cash. Those cases are a little bit more complicated because you basically track the person a lot of times via their social security number. You can find out how much they're paying through the tax system with a social security number. If they don't have a social security number and they're working cash, those cases can get a little bit more complicated because it's hard to find the money. Is it impossible? No, but it gets a little bit more complex. And unfortunately, in the community that we serve, that's a lot of our cases, right? Where the parent doesn't have a social security number. He's not being honest about his income. And so does it mean you shouldn't fight for it? Absolutely not. But I just, would want the listeners to know that those cases are not cut and dry because the other person's not going to be honest. Most likely not. I shouldn't say most likely isn't, because we have some parents come to me and say, I want to pay child support and I want to know how much I'm supposed to be paying. Can you represent me? And I love those cases because I'm like, yes, let's do it. That's the responsible thing to do. But it doesn't always happen in real life. So
what about the ITN number?
That can be useful in lieu of a social security number, as long as we know where the person's working, because whether an attorney's helping with a child support case or if a person goes through the state, because the state can also handle child support cases, we have to be able to find where that person's working, how much they're earning, because again, we're looking at pay stubs. We need to know how much they're earning on a monthly basis. So we have to be able to gather certain basic information, whether it's a social security number, ITIN number, if a parent is paying cash and they can provide proof of that, whatever the information is, we have to be able to get our hands on it to be able to do some calculations for child support.
Pues para cerrar la conversación con la abogada Nicholson, lo que platicamos ahorita al final es acerca de manutención, que no importa si la mamá o el papá de tu hijo tiene un ITN number, va a costar un poquito más de trabajo si ganan cash y no tienen un seguro social, pero es algo que también que se puede pelear. Y yo creo que esta conversación de eso se trataba el día de hoy. Saber que no importa cuál es tu estatus migratorio, que no importa en dónde viva tu pareja, si tú tienes más de 6 meses viviendo en el estado de Carolina del Norte, puedes exigir los derechos tanto como divorcio, manutención, patria potestad de tus niños. Así que voy a compartir con ustedes los números de teléfono una vez más de las oficinas del abogado en Charlotte, Charleston, en Morganton, 704-457-5094. 704-457-5094 es el número de teléfono para que te comuniques con la abogada Nicholson si tienes alguna pregunta acerca de casos familiares. Estamos los viernes aquí a través de la página del abogado Johnson & Nicholson hablando temas de migración y el día de hoy hablando acerca de leyes familiares, que es otro de los tipos de casos que ellos toman. So they just send me a text here. What about if my child is not a USA citizen? Can I still file for child support or visitations?
Yes, absolutely.
Ok, la pregunta que me enviaron aquí por textito es, mi hijo no es nacido en los Estados Unidos. ¿Puedo pelear o puedo pedir como sea manutención y exigir visitaciones de su padre? Dice que sí, definitivamente sí. Así que bueno, ahí está la información. Una vez más, ponemos los números de teléfono en pantalla para que ustedes marquen si tienen alguna pregunta. 704-457-5094. Los invito a que más tarde busquen el video. Anything else that you would like to add before we go?
Well, we could sit here probably and take any one of those topics and spend like a whole, afternoon talking about them. Most cases are not that complicated, but every now and then you run up against a very complicated case. So, it's always best to consult with an attorney. Any questions, whether you think it's very basic or very complicated. But again, a lot of these cases are pretty straightforward and kind of easy to dispose of. Even a lot of times they're resolved outside of court with no one ever needing to set foot in a courthouse. And those are the best kinds of cases because there's a lot of flexibility in negotiating the terms.
Last quick questions now that you mentioned that sometimes we don't even have to, go to court. Does the family that has anything to do with immigration, if I send to court because child support or visitations to my parent with immigration will get involved?
No. I do a lot of cases all the time. I would say probably over 50% of my clients are undocumented, and that's never an issue in terms of being hesitant about filing or seeking whatever rights that we want to enforce. Absolutely not an issue.
Pues la última pregunta que yo le hice a la abogada es, si mi pareja no tiene un estatus migratorio, ¿podría complicarse su caso con inmigración si lo llevo a corte para pedirle que me dé manutención o para exigirle que vea a sus hijos o viceversa? Y dice la abogada que ellos toman todo el tiempo casos de esa forma y que migración no está envuelto de ninguna manera. Así que bueno, hoy estuvimos platicando acerca de tus derechos en leyes familiares aquí con Johnson & Nicholson. Tómate tiempo para volver a ver este video más tarde con subtítulos y cualquier pregunta vuelvo a mandar que se la hacemos llegar a la abogada Johnson, pero siempre consulte a un abogado antes de tomar decisiones sobre su caso familiar. Thank you very much, Ms. Nicholson. It was very nice to see you.
Thank you.
As always, we'll learn. Seguimos en contacto con Johnson & Nicholson y CLT en español.
Bye bye.